I was talking to a student, or a student stopped by the cafe when I was just preparing for this event, and this slide had just come up. And I thought, oh God, I have to tell Kendra to change it to how to talk with teaching assistants about inclusivity. And so the student came over and said, you have a shocked look on your face. And I said, yeah, and I explained what it was. And she goes, this is one of the best students I've ever had. She goes, Professor Greene, sometimes you have to talk to people. So, how to talk to teaching assistants about inclusivity. So the first thing I want to emphasize, and I think this really, I hope that the word on this is really getting out, and part of our CITL program, training TA trainers, has been a sort of public service announcement about this, is that we have a lot of research to tell us that the TA role can play an essential part in enhancing student success. If we underutilize the TAs, and if we don't train our TAs, and if we don't have the TAs be a part of our overall learning goals, if they don't understand what our learning goals are and how we're trying to get to them, then student success is not going to happen, okay? So we really need to understand that they play a critical role as translators between our learning goals and the student's experience, especially given that we know that we can't do everything that we need to do in lectures. One of the ways that we can support student success, and again, we have quite a lot of research on this, is to let the students know that we are a cohesive teaching team. So there's a phrase in the professional development world that you have probably heard, which is high demand, high support courses. So we set our goals for the class high for the students. We message to them that we have faith in the possibility that they're going to learn a lot, but we give them a lot of support. If students see the instructors of the course as a coherent team working together, they are more likely to reach those high demands. If the TAs aren't coming to lectures, if it feels like the TA and the professor are not really working as part of a team, that doesn't message to them that that support exists and that it's an integrated, unified pedagogical experience. So one dimension of this, and I should say that I specialize in the teaching of medium to large lecture courses, so about 125 to 200, all my courses are that. I've only taught 2 small courses in 20 years, except to graduate students, is that it really makes a difference how we talk about our students with our TAs and how we talk about our TAs with our students. So I describe my relationship with my TAs in class to the students as this is the instructor team, and I call my TAs the other instructors. And it really lets the students know that I value the place of the section as I have planned for it to be a part of their learning experience. It's not a way to get them to waste an hour and 10 minutes, keeping busy and chatting with each other. So I really let them know, if you don't put these 2 parts of this experience together, you're not going to reach our learning goals. We all know that the favored genre of talking about teaching is the complaint. So if we get into a mode with our students, and I definitely had this mode for a long time of kind of using office hours anecdotally to talk about all the crazy things that happened with little Bobby and little Billy this week, then we're not really messaging to our TAs what I'm going to talk about in a moment, which is a growth mindset. We're not messaging to our TAs that we believe that every single student in our class can achieve our learning outcomes, and that if they don't achieve our learning outcomes, it's largely, although not exclusively, on us. So really helping our TAs see that we sort of take a professional approach to the teaching, and that we are not there exclusively or largely to anecdotalize, although occasionally we have to do that. So the third thing is to communicate with TAs about teaching practices that promote inclusivity. And one of the sort of back and forth, trickle up, trickle down methods that we are using at CITL is to offer these department workshops on inclusive teaching, and then to make sure that inclusivity is a big part of the TA training, so that then we all know about inclusive practices and we can remind each other, and we can also bring our different inclusivity practices and share them with each other. So 3 inclusivity practices very briefly that I try to talk about with my TAs and that I hope that they then bring to the other classes that they take, so that we have a kind of rapid transformation of the culture of teaching around here. First is growth mindset. that I have the experience frequently, particularly because I teach in a writing-based field, that my students have very identity-based statements, the quintessential one being, I am a bad writer. Okay, so the students don't really understand sometimes, or so they tell me, that they could actually come to my class and get better at writing. They think that by the time they're 20 years old and taking an upper division lit class, they're either a good writer or a bad writer, and the rest of what happens around the course sort of happens around that. So I let them know that writing is a set of skills and that part of my job is to teach them those skills. Same with reading. Same with understanding extremely arcane literary theory, which is what I teach them. Okay, you can learn this, everyone can learn this, and it's my job to teach you how to become a good learner of this. Okay. Second is intentional group work. We all know from, even if we know almost nothing about active learning, that we're supposed to have students work in groups. But if we are not intentional about the way that we break students up into groups, we will perfectly replicate all the forms of social inequality that they walked in the door with. So we have to think about how we have them break into groups. And there are a variety of intentional ways to do that, some of which we'll model for you in about 5.5 minutes. Okay? So also making sure that the activities that they do in their group work are what a colleague of ours at Stanford calls group worthy. Okay, so if you're going to break them into groups, you have to actually give them a practice to do in the group, and you have to have them come out of that practice with something. So it's not just the having had a conversation. Also, don't give them enough time to hang themselves with. Okay, very brief. You know, we're like half an hour, we'll check back in half an hour. No, okay? 2 minutes is how often I generally give people in my lecture classes to do little projects together. Okay, so scale it small. And finally, make sure that your teaching team has a shared set of agreements about assessment of the students. That doesn't mean that we have the fantasy that everyone will grade identically. But, you know, just to go back to what Tanya said about rubrics, I don't love writing rubrics, and my TAs don't love using rubrics. But we know 2 things about rubrics in writing-based courses. We know that TAs work fewer hours, and we know that undergraduate students reach their learning outcomes better. So no matter how much you don't like rubrics, they've often had them in secondary school, and they know how to use them to improve. So there's just a very, very few things. I love to talk about this topic, so if anyone ever wants to come and talk about working with TAs, it's a particularly dear to my heart one. Thank you.